We are starting to see some normal operations at airports across the country after an unprecedented FAA outage grounded all flights for hours Wednesday morning. It's something we haven't seen since 9/11, and now travelers are demanding changes so we don't see a repeat. Joining us right now, former Air Force pilot and aviation expert, Dr. Daryl Smith. Thanks for joining us. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
So the FAA said it traced the problem to a damaged database file and that there was no evidence of a cyber attack. But you know, this brings up so many questions about weaknesses in the FAA. Why don't we have more updated systems and technological advancements so that a damaged file will not ground tens of thousands of flights?
Yeah, I think the bottom line is there's very little incentive for the federal government to update their systems. Remember back in the early 90s when Scott O'Grady was shot down in Europe, he talked about he was being rescued with very brave folks, but they were using equipment from the Vietnam era 30 years prior. So the federal government, because there's versus the private sector, there's a lot of incentive to innovate. The federal government doesn't have that incentive, and sometimes they frankly can get complacent. That's one of the problems with central planning and socialism, no incentive to innovate. So I would say that that centers on the problem.
What's crazy is you would think after 9/11 that this would have been a priority. Some experts say it's not just this antiquated system, it's that there's just not enough air traffic controllers and safety specialists. Why is that not the case? I mean, do we need a complete overhaul of this agency?
Yeah, it's very frustrating to me as a pilot. Most of the American public doesn't know this, but the FAA made a push within the last few years is we want more diversity, so we're going to go after people of color and women. Well, I think what we ought to be going after are people that are qualified to do the job. Air traffic control is a very difficult and complex job. If the person's a woman, if the person's of color, great, but that shouldn't be the primary qualification. There is a shortage of air traffic controllers, and part of that is because of our hiring practices and policies we've had the last few years, and it's very frustrating.
And also the Federal Aviation Administration doesn't even have a permanent leader because the person President Biden nominated did not receive Senate confirmation. The person he wants, as we mentioned before, in that position has been criticized for his limited aviation experience and because of his involvement in this public corruption investigation in Los Angeles. So right now there is someone serving in that position temporarily since March of last year. Is this shocking to you? One of the most important positions for the FAA?
Not shocking, but frustrating. It makes many of us angry. You know, President Biden has chosen to surround himself by a certain group of people, and it seems like diversity is the first and most important qualification. While diversity is important, again, we need qualified people. And the folks he's been choosing have, quite frankly, not had a lot of experience in the transportation industry, including the current Secretary of Transportation. So it makes you wonder why these folks are being selected.
So what happens next? What moves does the president need to make? What moves does the government need to make and the FAA need to make to prevent this from happening again?
Yes, I learned years ago, everything rises and falls on leadership. As a Navy SEAL once told me, a good leader has a plan, a great leader has a backup plan. It seems like we don't have contingency plans and systems in place. That needs to be addressed. You see how President Biden handled the debacle of exiting Afghanistan with people hanging off the airplanes. You begin to wonder about the leadership and who he's surrounded himself with. Again, everything rises and falls with leadership, and I think until our leadership issues are addressed at all levels, we may not see satisfactory resolution of these types of problems.
Former Air Force pilot and aviation expert, as well as Associate Professor of Management at Cedarville University, Dr. Daryl Smith, we appreciate your time with us this morning. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.